wait on your okay.
You'll be good to go.
We're
Enjoy.
good to go. All right, excellent. So after those two invited talks, we're now going to start the contributed talk session on contact tracing. I would like to remind you all that you should put questions into the Zulip stream for this session, and also to abide by the IACR's code of conduct that you agreed to when you registered for the conference. We're going to move over to the first talk now, which is exposure notification system may allow for large-scale voter suppression, presented by Rosario Gennaro. Rosario, would you please go ahead and unmute and share your screen?
Sure. Let me know if you can hear me well.
I can hear you.
It is. Okay.
And
you should be seeing
I can see
now.
Yeah, you're not in
You're right. I'm going to go in presenter mode now. Okay.
Excellent.
Can you see me?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So this is joint work with James Kralisten, the Prep for All Cooperative, and Adam Kralisten of Symbiont. Contact tracing in the US, let me briefly say that in the US, public health is mostly the domain of the individual states. We had very bad coordination from the federal government. Therefore, individual states were left on their own to develop their contact tracing apps. The first one that was launched was Virginia in August, the state of Virginia, eventually followed by other states. The last count that I have is about 20 of the 50 states in the country have apps. They all follow the GAEN framework, the Google and Apple framework that was discussed by Carmela earlier today. And now the apps are interoperative between states using a national exposure server, which is run by the Public Health Laboratories Association. Adoption rate has remained incredibly low. These are numbers from November. You can compare the adoption in the US with, for example, Ireland in Europe. Numbers are incredibly low. This is actually how I got involved. I was not following this area during the early days of the pandemic, but in the summer, my friends at Prep for All were contacted by the Linux Foundation to help develop strategy exactly to advocate for adoption. Prep for All is a AIDS activist and advocacy organization. They've been incredibly successful at advocating for PrEP, which for those of you that know is a daily pill regimen that prevents people from getting infected by HIV. So they were contacted to sort of ask, develop, and brainstorm on strategies to help adopting these apps. And I happen to know some of the people in the Prep for All community. James, my co-author, asked me and Adam, who were the tech people, to sort of look at the design. I had not looked at the design until the summer. And we learned about some of the security risks that we're going to talk about today. And we decided to approach this more as activism than science. So if you're looking for novel scientific contribution in this talk, you're not going to have any. As more I'm going to tell you what I did in the particular context of election security. So this is, you've probably seen it already in Carmela's talk, but these phones broadcast RPIs. There are random numbers. They are picked up by other phones. And if you ever get infected, you upload the key that is used to generate the pseudorandom number in an exposure server. Other phones download those keys and they can tell if they're being exposed or not by matching the RPIs that they've recorded for the last few days. Many of you may be familiar with the fact that this framework does not protect against replay attacks. The RPI codes broadcasted by one device can be easily captured and rebroadcasted in different locations. If those RPIs become associated with infected individuals, then these other people would believe to be exposed even if they actually were not. This was well documented in the crypto literature. We did not discover it. It was well known. And so How do you do that? You could launch relay attacks in many ways. You could have malware on your, like a rogue app that collects and rebroadcasts this RPIs, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. There could be a physical attack. You can have Bluetooth relay stations that would, again, capture and rebroadcast these numbers. You would be able to obtain RPIs associated to infected people by, for example, stationing yourself outside a testing site or through a black market. Or, you know, in the worst case, a determined attack could even get itself infected. Turns out, actually, something that we learned really recently, that the RPIs, or sorry, this should say actually the tags of infected people that have been loaded into the server do not expire fast enough and can be used to rebroadcast the RPIs in other locations. So once you load your tag, your key on the exposure server, I shouldn't be able to download it and broadcast using that tag because they will be expired. But it turns out that there is a narrow window of opportunity there to reuse and recycle those keys. So in all this crypto discussion and literature about the relay attacks, voter suppression was never mentioned as far as I know. But we did find in April a column in the Brookings Institute magazine about how voting suppression could be an issue here. So we were not actually the first to raise this issue. And the attack could be either on the population, meaning you mount a large-scale relay attack targeting geographical areas that are known to lean for a particular party, and those people would be notified and they would isolate and possibly skip voting. You could also attack the voting infrastructure. For example, you could target USPS facilities to delay the processing of mail-in ballots, which was already happening during the last election because the USPS was swamped by the large number of mail-in ballots that arrived. So imagine if on top of that, a large number of employees would call in sick and stay home. This problem is particularly compounded by the US electoral system, which is inherently fragile. It's very sensitive to small perturbation in voter turnout in specific areas. There's a classic political science paper from 2007. The title is "Republicans Should Opt for Rain," because lower turnout due to rain can be argued to have had a critical impact on the outcome of at least 2 presidential elections. And usually low turnout usually favored the Republican Party. And the question is, and this was briefly touched by Carmela in her talk, how does a notification of exposure compares to a rainy day? We don't know how we have no user studies on the behavior of people using this app. What would they do when they get notified, even on election day when it's their civic duty to go vote? Would they stay home? Wouldn't stay home? We don't know, but we know that even something as simple as rain has such a high effect on the election. So what would be a successful attack? Obviously, one that would suppress enough vote to flip the result of the election, but an effective attack might just be sufficient to delegitimize the result by injecting enough doubt and mistrust in the electoral process. In that sense, a small-scale attack might be sufficient, and I'll talk about that a little later in the talk as well. So what do we do? Again, we were not interested in publishing paper and getting press and do any of that. We just wanted to sort of raise concern about this issue. We wrote a note. We privately circulated it among security and cryptography and public health activists. We sent it to Google and Apple. And actually, Google and Apple were very responsive to this. We got several meetings with both technical teams and sort of discussed what the issues were. And our main goal, we didn't want to get the apps off the market. We didn't want to disrupt this attempt of using technology to help combat the pandemic. We knew that it was important to keep trying. to use these apps. But we sort of advocated for a very simple patch would have been to suspend notification for a few days before election day. We thought this was very minimal approach. It would have had very minimal public health implications, and it would have basically removed the threat that we were considering. Eventually, our note was picked up by the media, and it became public again, and that led me to submit it to RWC. The criticism, why we were not somewhat taken seriously, or this was not considered a reasonable threat. The idea, the main response that we received from Google, Apple, and many in the academic community was that this was not a rational path for the adversary, that if you want to let people to stay home, you can do much easier, simpler things. For example, spread misinformation on social media about your polling station being infected, of a large, that actually was one of the suggestions brought up. I find that to be kind of a difficult argument to sort of digest. One thing that I want to say is that here, fake news and disinformation on social media is a fake, it's something that is not true, that is made to look like it's true and reliable. Here is the opposite. Here is an official government communication channel is being tampered with and is being made to give incorrect information. I may not be an easy target of misinformation campaign on Facebook, but I will believe my app when it tells me that I've been exposed. So it opens a whole new way of reaching targets that may not be susceptible to fake misinformation on social media. There were several countermeasures to large-scale relay attack, and some of them are, you can go to the risk and mitigation FAQ for GAEN, and the first one is, only infected people can upload text, and so you cannot create this large-scale relay attack, which I found to be inadequate. Because as I said, there's many ways that you can put your hands on the infected RPIs of infected people. In particular, this last attack that's been recently discovered that you can recycle the keys. You can monitor for drop in the test positivity rates. If a lot of people get notified, a lot of people get tested, and you'll notice that there's something not consistent with the epidemiological models, but that's completely useless in the case of voter suppression, because that will happen maybe by the time you notice the election is come and gone. You could stop malware from broadcasting RPIs, and this is actually something that when we started discussing this, we were not aware that Apple, for example, reserves the Bluetooth UID only to this particular GAEN app. So it's basically impossible on iOS to create a rogue app that pretends to be a GAEN broadcasting beacon. That's actually not that. On Android, that countermeasure does not exist, but they have a very strict review process in the Google Play Store that should stop this kind of malware from being.
Rosario, we've got to go to Q&A in like a sec. So
okay, let me give you a couple. And anyway, let me just say that one more thing. Were they using the recent elections? There is no evidence of that. Thank you. Thank goodness. Probably because of the low adoption. But I do think that we did dodge a bullet, in particular because the legitimacy of the election has been successfully questioned in the mind of many people. And if there had been even a small attack that had been proven to happen, that could have created enough evidence to foster these doubts and create these doubts. So again, why not suspend notification? We think it was a PR issue. And let me close with some lessons. I believe there's been a lot of talk about centralized versus decentralized, but for me, the question is security versus insecurity. And public health is one of the most important roles of government. And yes, we have to protect the privacy of the individuals, but we also need to protect the official communication channels that go from the government to the citizens and not leave them open to tampering. And okay, and I'm done.
Great, thank you. I see two quick questions in the chat, which maybe you can address very briefly here before we move on, since we're a couple minutes behind. Question, and I'll give you both of them. How much worse with the spamming would this be than spamming phones with text messages claiming to be from the Department of Health? And then the second question is the attack still a risk if most people vote by mail?
So no. So the first one is, again, I believe that if you hold on, whereas that if you are receiving some text messages claiming to be from the Department of Health, you can call back the Department of Health and verify that they're sending text messages. Again, there are ways for people who are interested to figure out that you're dealing with a spam phone call. On the other end, this is the official app there's a qualitative difference between spam text message and spam email and an official government app. Regarding voting by mail, or early voting, for example, here in New York State, we have early voting, and we could vote for 2 weeks before election. So those are all very good possible countermeasures to this issue. But again, the large number of ballots are casted on election day. And again, you need a very small drop in turnout to have an effective attack. And again, remember that a successful attack could be the one that just create a perception that something went wrong and not that something actually went wrong.
Great, thank you, Rosario. We'll take the remaining things to the Zulip chat and perhaps continue the conversation there. We're running a little late, so I need to move on. So Ayal, if you start screen sharing, that's great. Our next speaker, privacy preserving Bluetooth-based contact tracing, one size does not fit all, presented by Ayal Ronen. Ayal, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see your slides.
Yeah, great. Okay, so thank you. This is a joint work together with Benny Pincus and many other people that contributed to the design, implementation, deployment, and now deprecation of BLE contact tracing in Israel. And I want to start with a little bit background of how contact tracing was done in Israel. And in the beginning of the epidemic, as in many other countries, we started with doing manual epidemiological interrogations where infected persons were asked about known contacts so they can be notified. And what is maybe more unique to Israel, those persons were also asked about public locations where they visited, for example, supermarkets or public transportations, and a full list of those locations and the exact times where they were visited was published in the beginning actually in newspapers, and then in dedicated websites and Telegram channels, and people could just read and see if they were in the close vicinity of an infected person. And this is something that might look a little bit strange to people because it reveals quite a lot of information about those infected people. But I feel that in Israel it was generally accepted in the consensus, and I think this comes from some social norm where people don't hide these kind of things. And actually, when someone is COVID-19 positive, everybody in his everybody that knows him is going to know about it one way or the other. This is just the way things are, if we like it or not. And as an example, this is the official website by the Ministry of Health, and you can see that today in 8:28 a.m. Israel time, an infected person visited a coffee place called Rothschilda. Now, this is something that, of course, doesn't scale up. People can't read all of the locations of hundreds of or even thousands of new infected persons per day. And relatively in the beginning, the Israeli government made a very controversial decision to actually use a counterterrorism tool of the security service to trace people and to notify people if they were in close vicinity to COVID-19 positive persons. And this is something that is presumably, we don't officially know, is based on data from cellular companies. And it's something that is done without anyone's consent. And if you get notified, which is done by an SMS message, you are required by law to self-quarantine for the required amount of time. And a part of the various privacy and ethical issues, this tool is also not very effective. There's a very large number of false negatives. A lot of people are not identified. And there's a very, very large number of false positives. People are asked to be or forced to be quarantined without any reason. There's a large number of appeals that have been accepted. And generally, people don't like this tool for a lot of really good reasons. Now, me and Benny thought that this situation, what can we try to do about it? And it seems that the natural reaction of any cryptographer in the world at that time is to try to design a BLE contact tracing scheme. Now, we started working about in March, and we also came up, like many other people, with a decentralized solution that we called the Ashomer, or the protector in Hebrew. And this is, was a solution that was actually tailored for the specific requirements of the Israeli Ministry of Health. And it has some significant differences, significant similarities and differences from the DSRPT. For example, we do protect against relay attacks. We have other ways to generate and even redact specific keys and times. But for all of these cool details, I invite you to go and actually read the full white paper. And what I want to focus on today are specific trade-offs that we actually done very differently from DSRPT, and try to explain why we did this. And I feel that maybe one of the most important trade-offs is the way that we want to protect the infected person's privacy compared to what kind of explanations we're going to give to the users. Now, as we already know at this point, if I get notified that I was in close contact with someone, and for example, in the last 14 days, I only met one person, this will automatically reveal to me who is the infected person. It's going to leak his identity. And this DSRPT tries to handle this type of issues by giving the minimal amount of information needed for people, which basically means you're going to tell what is the day that you were in contact, so you know how many days you need to self-isolate. And this basically has an implicit assumption that people are going to comply with this requirement to self-isolate. They're going to have a lot of trust in the system, and they're going to accept the risk of a false positive. And the false positive might happen because there is some bug or error in the system. It might be because I was standing 3 meters away from someone that was infected, but it was outdoors, we didn't talk with each other, but the BLE connection was strong enough. And I would not have the information to know if this was the situation or if I got contact from another closed meeting in an office. On the other extreme end, we might actually say people, okay, this is the full information. This is the exact time when you were exposed. This is the infected person that you were exposed to, and this is the specific location. This gives you all of the information you can get about a specific contact. And we decided to take the middle ground, basically give the amount of information we think that people in Israel with the long history of false negative and false announcements they got will agree to comply with this notification, which means we're going to give you the approximate time of contact. So we try to understand if this is the time where you are in a supermarket or you are at home or some other place that you know you're okay. And we do notice that this implicitly means that the user might learn the location because he might know where he was, he might have local GPS history. And we believe this trade-off that is required for this application to actually work in Israel. Another interesting trade-off is about location. If do we want to store GPS location? This is a trade-off with coverage. And we understand by now that For contact tracing, we don't need to know the locations. We just need to know the contact graph of the infected persons. And we do it by assuming everybody has smartphones. We're going to communicate in BLE, and we're going to identify contacts. However, we have a problem if some of these people don't have a smartphone and have a very old or dumb phone that doesn't support this technology. And specifically in Israel, there's a very large part of the population do not own smartphones, for example, for religious reasons. And then this whole scheme doesn't include them. And we need to find a way to cover them. And actually, very early on, the Israeli Ministry of Health developed a decentralized GPS-based solution that basically downloads the list from the website that we've seen before, and then try to compare this location with your own local GPS history and see if you're in close vicinity to anyone that was infected. And this gives a local alert. Nothing leaves the device. It was actually very accepted by many privacy and security experts in Israel, and everybody was really, really happy. The main problem is that, apart from the cost of the manual interrogation, is that GPS has very low accuracy, especially in buildings. And again, we have a lot of false positives. However, on the other end, we have BLE, which is more accurate, but has only partial coverage in this population. So you can ask yourself, why not do both? And the main problem with doing both is Google and Apple. Google and Apple will not let you use their GAEN API if you want to store local information. This is even if this is for decentralized and local usage, even when the app is voluntary, even when the using location data is voluntary inside the app. And this is even when, as we heard, Google might be actually collecting this GPN information by itself. And this was basically a deal breaker for the Ministry of Health. They couldn't agree to lose this large part of the population. We talked a lot with Google, the other people, tried to make them see our point of view, and it didn't work. So after a few months, extra months.
2 minutes remaining.
Okay, thanks. Still, we were able to develop a new application that bypassed the current limitation that we know. And you can see the design references. It was again endorsed by all of the Israeli private experts. Everybody were happy. And the problem is that, unlike again, one that was actually downloaded by a lot of people, the public simply didn't install the app. It was a colossal failure, and it was recently deprecated. And we can ask ourselves what went wrong. And there were some technical issues by not using GAEN, but I think the main reason is that we try to design and implement a good privacy-preserving scheme, but it doesn't mean that the public understood this. And there's a general distrust of the government and the Ministry of Health currently in the way that they respond to the whole COVID-19 crisis, and the usage of the security service tool was something that made people unable to understand what is the difference between this application and the other things. And actually part of the government wanted this application to fail because it enables them to justify using the security service as for contact tracing, which is much easier. So in conclusions, I feel that we need to find better ways how to communicate these complex privacy issues to the public to allow them to make much more informed decisions. We need to understand that different countries have different norms regarding privacy, security, and different priorities, and we can't just force everybody to, in the world, to do what we think is right for ourselves. And I want to believe that Google and Apple actually care about users' privacy, and I support the fact that they don't want the centralized solution, for example. But the way that they coerce the governments to use their own products without any modification is problematic. It leads to much worse tools, and it prevents any possibility of competition or variation of other solutions. We need to think about it in a larger scope. And I will be happy to answer any questions, and recommend you to wear a mask, practice social distancing, and wash your hands often as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Eyal. I see one question in the chat from Ari Trachtenberg. Did Hamagen, I hope I pronounced that right, expose the GPS data of infected users to the rest of the country?
No.
Okay, great. All right, we're gonna now go on. Thank you very much. We're running a little bit behind, so we're gonna go on to the next session. And I'm gonna just give everyone a heads up that at the end of the third talk, before we go to break, Kevin's got a poll that we're gonna put out at the end. So just stick around for the poll right at the end. Our last talk is titled Privately Connecting Mobility to Infectious Diseases via Applied Cryptography, and will be presented by Lucas Helminger. Lucas, I see your slides. Please go ahead and start your talk. Lucas, are you? I can't hear you.
He's still muted, Brian.
Lucas, you're muted. I can't see him.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Yes, you're still muted, Lucas. Lucas, you need to unmute, or Kay or Kevin, can you unmute him?
I can only ask him to unmute,
Okay.
which he may not be able to see while he's sharing screen.
Okay.
So now it's working?
Yes, now it is. Thank you.
Perfect.
Please continue.
Oh, okay. So I'm really happy to tell you about some work that I've been doing together with my colleagues Alexandros Pampolidis, Alessandro Bruni, Daniel Kales, Christian Rechberger, and Roman Walch. We came up with a solution that connects mobility data to infectious disease data in a privacy-preserving way. Our approach is orthogonal to contact tracing apps, so we do not require smartphones, and the data is already available and collected by mobile network operators. Our solution gives a big picture of a current outbreak and about future directions. In contrast, we cannot do contact tracing with our protocol, so we do not see individual infection with it. It is long known that human mobility is a critical factor in infectious disease. So to better understand human mobility directly translates into a better understanding of the dynamic of an outbreak. And 10 years ago, researchers started to use mobile phone data to model this mobility patterns. The outcome were what you see on the slide, heat maps, where you could see where the outbreak was originated and where it will be probably spread. And this was verified for various diseases like malaria, dengue, or cholera. And so far, researchers aggregated mobility data of all subscribers of a particular mobile network operator. And this worked quite well, but they had issues when there were relatively few cases. So if you're in the beginning of a pandemic or in the beginning of a second or third wave. And in addition, they had problems if there were unexceptional events like mass gatherings. And our solution, so our protocol, wants to close the gap and also be of utility if the cases are relatively low. And for this, our proposition is that we aggregate mobility data only of infected individuals. And therefore, this should lead to a more accurate picture about the current outbreak. This seems rather obvious. So why wasn't this done so far? And the reason is because of privacy concerns. And our protocol should overcome these privacy concerns. And the solution is cryptography. And more concretely, we are using several privacy enhancing technologies. And the most important one is homomorphic encryption. So through homomorphic encryption, we will protect the patient's identifiers, but we are then still able to do something useful with the data. Also, we are applying some zero knowledge like proof techniques so that, for example, we can ensure that the aggregation has a certain minimum size of individuals. And we are also relying on differential privacy, as previous attacks has shown that only aggregating location data is not enough for privacy. Now to the protocol. How does it work? On the left, you see the researchers that have a list of individuals that are infected with their IDs, here depicted with their phone numbers, so their mobile phone numbers. The first thing the researchers do is they encrypt the list with homomorphic encryption. Once they have done this, they send it to the mobile network operator. And the mobile network operator has its own database with all his subscribers and the associated location data. And all the computations on the mobile network operator side happen in the homomorphic domain. This means that the ciphertext, so the list of infected individuals, never gets decrypted in the whole process. The first thing the operator does, he validates the request. That's what I said, that he looks if there are enough people in this list of infected individuals. And he does this with techniques that come from bulletproofs, because he cannot look into this list because it's encrypted through homomorphic encryption. And then comes the data aggregation. This is the core of the protocol. Here, the mobile network operator computes the heat map. And technically, this is a vector matrix multiplication, where the vector represents all the subscribers of the particular mobile network operator, and where a 1 indicates that this subscriber is infected, and a 0 that it is not. And the matrix on the other side, so the mobility matrix, is from the mobile network operator, and one entry in this matrix tells you about the amount that one individual spent in a particular cell tower. And if you multiply this, you get the aggregation of the location data of all infected individuals. And in the end, the mobile network operator adds some noise to this heat map. And once you have done this, he can send it back to the researchers. And see, this is still encrypted, so the mobile network operator never sees this heat map. But the researchers have the private key to decrypt the heat map and get the result. Now to the real worldness of the protocol, because usually homomorphic encryption is very expensive. So is this protocol even feasible on a large scale? And yes, it is. It took us less than 2 hours, or equivalently $10 on AWS, to compute the heat map for small nations like Austria or big cities like Singapore and New York City. Since our protocol scales linearly in the dimension of the mobility matrix, it is even efficient for larger countries. What about security? In a nutshell, we get semi-honest security by using homomorphic encryption. But we think that it is not enough to have semi-honest security when we are dealing with medical records and location data. So we added some few technical measures and could prove that we have privacy against malicious adversaries. What does this mean concretely for our protocol? It means that even a malicious mobile network operator, that one that deviates from the protocol, can get any information out of the vector so that he can see if one of his subscribers is infected or not. On the other side, a malicious researcher will never be able to single out individuals from the heat map. And for the last part, we needed this noise adding. So, and therefore we conducted a lot of privacy utility trade-off experiments so that we could see how the range of the epsilon should be in this differential privacy to have the perfect privacy utility trade-off. All the results I told you here, you can find in the paper, and there are more technical explanations for the security, so the security proof and performance measurements, and also the details how we conducted the differential privacy experiments.
2 minutes remaining.
And an additional thing that is in the paper is a multi-page legal analysis of our protocol. And to break it down, it says that because of the use of homomorphic encryption, differential privacy, and some other technical measures, our protocol is GDPR compliant. Even though this protocol I presented you is for a specific use case, the idea of our work is to convey the following message: that even in times of crisis, where it is tempting to maybe temporarily lower data protection standards for purposes of big data analytics, there are technical methods to keep data protection standards high. And those technical methods are practical and available right now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lucas. I see 2 questions in the chat. Before I go to the questions, I'm going to ask Kevin to launch his poll so we all can kind of fill that out while we're going through the questions. So Kevin, feel free to launch that when you wish.
I just have a one small announcement. This is not really a scientific poll. This is a heavy selection bias in this group, but I'm a little curious if people have installed the apps. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I've got 3 questions for Lucas. I'll start with one from Matthias Kraft. What is the time span for a single heat map rated at 2 hours or $10 in AWS time?
The time frame?
Yeah.
So if I understand it correctly, maybe the time frame is so for how long the data, we're looking at data for the last 7 days.
Last 7 days.
So
okay.
we have some, but it doesn't really matter because all these days get summed up, and then you have just an integer value in this matrix. So from a performance reason, it really doesn't matter if you have several days or 1 day.
Excellent. Second question I see, are there 2 variants of the protocol for semi-honest malicious adversaries? And is there a performance hit if so?
So basically we could split them up. We only now would recommend to use the privacy against malicious adversaries. And there is not much overhead because we could reduce this to a non-interactive proof system. So there is not that much overhead from semi-honest to malicious security. Okay,
great. 2 more questions I see. One, which homomorphic encryption realization did you use?
So we used Microsoft's open source library Seal for realization and used our own matrix vector multiplication algorithm for that.
Great. Final question. Are there difficulties due to different sets of researchers and different mobile data providers all having separate databases?
So I have to say this wasn't rolled out so far. This would be problems that would come up if we roll it out. Excellent.
All right. I think with that, that concludes all the questions that I currently see in Zulip. We're sharing out the poll results from that instant poll. 48% of people apparently have installed a COVID tracing app or turned on exposure notification. I want to thank you all for attending this session and obviously continue the conversation in Zulip. We're now going to go to break. Kevin